The dust swirled in violent eddies as Fiona Sullivan clutched the edge of the rickety wagon, her knuckles white with fear and uncertainty. Everything she had once known was gone, swept away by the merciless fever that had claimed her parents just 3 weeks prior, leaving her alone on their modest homestead outside of Billings, Montana territory, with nothing but mounting debts and hungry creditors circling like vultures. It was 1878, and the West was still wild enough that a woman without protection was little more than property to be claimed. That harsh reality had become Fiona's nightmare when the bank seized her family's land, and Mr. Hargrove, the portly banker with cold eyes, had informed her that her father's debts would be settled one way or another. The wagon hit another rut, jostling Fiona from her dark thoughts. Beside her, Hargrove's hired man kept his eyes forward, saying nothing as they approached Montana City. Located in the southwestern portion of the Montana Territory, the town had sprung up during the gold rush years and had since established itself as a trading hub for the surrounding ranches and homesteads. Now, it would be the site of Fiona's ultimate humiliation. "You'll fetch a fair price," the driver finally spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "Pretty thing like you. Might even cover what your pa owed if we're lucky." Fiona stared straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her tears. At 22, she had harbored dreams of marriage, family, perhaps even running the homestead herself someday. Now she was cargo, being transported to an auction where she would be sold into servitude or worse to cover her father's debts. The main street of Montana City came into view, a dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. The false fronts of the more prosperous establishments loomed over the street, while horses stood hitched to posts, tails swishing in the late afternoon heat. The smells of tobacco, whiskey, and unwashed bodies mingled in the air, creating the unmistakable scent of a frontier town. The wagon rolled to a stop outside the Gilded Nugget Saloon, where a small crowd had already gathered. Fiona's stomach twisted into knots as Hargrove emerged from inside, his waistcoat straining against his substantial girth. His smile, meant to appear congenial to the onlookers, sent shivers down her spine. "Gentlemen," Hargrove called out, his voice carrying across the street, drawing more curious onlookers. "As promised, I present to you a rare opportunity. This fine young woman comes to us as payment for outstanding debts. Strong, healthy, and educated too, can read and write better than half the men here." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. "Bidding starts at $50. Fiona stood rigidly in the wagon bed, her chin raised despite the burning humiliation. She wore her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother, her red gold hair pinned back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She refused to look at the faces of the men who would bid on her as if she were livestock. "50, called a gruff voice from the back. "60, countered another. "75, a third voice, this one belonging to Gilbert Thornton, the owner of the town's largest saloon. His predatory gaze raked over her, assessing her value for his establishment. The bids continued to climb, and with each increase, Fiona's heart sank further. Her fate was being decided by strangers who saw her as nothing more than an investment, a body to be used until it broke. 120, Thornton called, silencing several of the other bidders. 150, countered a voice Fiona didn't recognize. She risked a glance and saw an older man, perhaps in his 50s, well-dressed but with cold, calculating eyes. Rumors had it that he ran a brothel in the next county over. 200, Thornton shot back, clearly unwilling to lose what he considered valuable merchandise. The crowd had grown silent now, watching the bidding war between the two men. Fiona felt dizzy with despair, knowing what awaited her regardless of which man won. "$250, the brothel owner said lazily, as if the amount were inconsequential. Thornton hesitated, then nodded. "$300. Hargrove beamed, clearly delighted that the bidding had far exceeded his expectations. $300, gentlemen. Do I hear $350? The brothel owner opened his mouth to respond when a new voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "She's not for sale." The words, though not shouted, carried a quiet authority that immediately silenced the gathering. The crowd parted, revealing a tall man astride a dappled gray stallion. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but Fiona could see the hard set of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes as he surveyed the scene before him. "Owen Ingram," someone in the crowd muttered, and several men took a step back. Hargrove's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Mr. Ingram, this is a legal proceeding to settle outstanding debts. Perhaps you'd care to place a bid yourself." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the dirt. He moved with the easy grace of someone accustomed to physical labor, his broad shoulders and lean frame suggesting both strength and agility. As he approached, Fiona caught her first clear look at his face, strong features weathered by sun and wind, a straight nose and eyes the color of a stormy sky. "I said," Owen repeated, his voice dropping lower, "she's not for sale." He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded document. "I've here a receipt showing that Jonathan Sullivan's debts to your bank were paid in full last week." Hargrove's face flushed an ugly shade of red. "That's impossible. I have no record. You were out of town," Owen interrupted. "Your clerk, Mr. Peterson, accepted the payment and provided this receipt." He unfolded the paper and held it up for all to see. "It seems you were misinformed about the status of Mr. Sullivan's account." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Hargrove snatched the paper from Owen's hand, his eyes darting over the document. Fiona watched, hope and confusion warring within her. She had never seen this man before, had no idea why he would intervene on her behalf, and couldn't understand how her father's debts had been settled when she knew there was no money. "This appears to be in order," Hargrove finally conceded, though his tone suggested he was far from pleased. "However, there are additional fees for the transport and—" "No, there aren't," Owen cut him off again. He turned to address the crowd. "You all witnessed Hargrove claim this was about settling debts that, as this receipt proves, were already paid. Any further demands would constitute fraud." His gaze swept the gathering, lingering on several prominent citizens. "I'm sure the territorial judge would be very interested to hear about a banker selling free women under false pretenses." The crowd's mood shifted perceptibly. What had begun as entertainment was now potentially a legal scandal, and no one wanted to be associated with it. Thornton, sensing which way the wind was blowing, was already backing away toward his saloon. Hargrove's face contorted with barely contained rage, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "Fine," he spat. "Take her. But don't think I'll forget this, Ingram." Owen ignored the threat, turning instead to Fiona. For the first time, his stern expression softened slightly. "Miss Sullivan," he said, offering his hand to help her down from the wagon. "I believe you've been through enough today. May I escort you somewhere safe?" Fiona hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his, feeling the strength and calluses of a working man's grip as he helped her to the ground. Her legs felt unsteady, the emotional whiplash of the last few minutes threatening to overwhelm her. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me?" "Let's get you somewhere quiet first," he replied, leading her away from the dispersing crowd. "Then we can talk." As they walked down the street, Fiona was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. Owen's stallion followed obediently behind them, no lead rope necessary, as they approached a modest but well-maintained building with a sign reading Montana City Telegraph and Post. "My sister runs the telegraph office," Owen explained as they reached the door. "She has rooms upstairs where you can rest." The interior was cool and quiet compared to the dusty street outside. A young woman looked up from behind a counter where she had been sorting mail, her features sharing enough similarity with Owen to mark her as his sister. "Owen." "I wasn't expecting," she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she took in Fiona's disheveled appearance. "What happened, Hargrove?" Owen said simply, and his sister's expression hardened in understanding. "I'm Olivia Ingram," she said, coming around the counter to take Fiona's hand. "You poor thing, you're shaking. Come upstairs, I'll make you some tea." Fiona allowed herself to be led up a narrow staircase to a small but tidy apartment above the telegraph office. Olivia settled her at a kitchen table before bustling about preparing tea while Owen remained standing, his tall frame making the room seem smaller. "Thank you," Fiona said, finding her voice at last. "But I still don't understand. That receipt. My father never mentioned paying his debts." Olivia and Owen exchanged a look that Fiona couldn't quite interpret. "He didn't," Owen admitted, removing his hat and placing it on a hook by the door. His hair was a rich brown, slightly darker than his sister's, with strands of gold where the sun had lightened it. "I paid them." Fiona stared at him, bewildered. "But why? You don't even know me." Owen pulled out a chair across from her and sat down, his movements deliberate. "I knew your father," he said. "Not well, but enough to respect him. When I heard what Hargrove was planning, it wasn't right." "Owen has a habit of involving himself in things that aren't right," Olivia remarked as she placed cups of steaming tea before them. "It's gotten him into trouble more than once." Fiona wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "I can't repay you," she said, the reality of her situation crashing back. "Everything is gone, the house, the land." "I didn't do it expecting repayment," Owen assured her, "but we do need to figure out what happens next. Do you have any family you can go to?" Fiona shook her head. "No one. My mother was an only child and my father's family is back east. We haven't had contact with them in years." "You can stay here tonight," Olivia offered without hesitation. "I have a spare room. And tomorrow," Owen continued, "we can discuss options. I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. There's always work to be done, cooking, cleaning, mending. It wouldn't be charity," he added, seemingly sensing her pride. "You'd earn your keep until you decide what you want to do." Fiona looked between the siblings, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only genuine concern in their expressions. Still, experience had taught her to be cautious. "Why would you do all this for a stranger?" Owen's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Because there was a time when I was alone, with no one to help me. If it weren't for the kindness of strangers, I wouldn't be here today." Something in his tone, in the quiet conviction of his words, resonated with Fiona. She was still wary a lifetime of lessons about the dangers facing lone women in the West couldn't be erased by one act of kindness, but she was also practical enough to recognize that her options were severely limited. "All right," she finally said. "I accept your offer of shelter for tonight. As for tomorrow," she took a deep breath, "we can discuss it then." Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "Good. I have some business to attend to in town, but I'll return in the morning." He rose from the table, retrieving his hat. "Olivia will take care of you until then." After Owen had left, Olivia showed Fiona to the spare room, small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt. "There's a wash basin and fresh towels," Olivia said. "And I can lend you a nightgown. We're about the same size." "Thank you," Fiona said, emotion suddenly threatening to overcome her. "For everything." Olivia's smile was warm. "No need to thank me. My brother has good instincts about people, and if he was willing to stand up to half the town for you, then you must be worth it." Left alone, Fiona sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to her. Tears came then, silent but plentiful, for her parents, for the home she had lost, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. But beneath the grief and fear, a small spark of something else flickered to life, gratitude, perhaps, or hope that even in her darkest hour, someone had chosen to stand up and say, "She's not for sale." As the sun crested the eastern horizon the following morning, Fiona woke to unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, disorientation gripped her before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up in the narrow bed, pushing aside the quilt, and took a steadying breath. A soft knock at the door preceded Olivia's voice. "Fiona, are you awake? I've made breakfast and Owen will be here soon." "Yes, thank you," she called back. "I'll be out shortly." Fiona dressed quickly in the same blue dress from yesterday, the only clothing she had, and attempted to tame her hair into a presentable style without the benefit of her hairbrush, which had been left behind at the homestead. When she emerged from the room, the aroma of coffee and fresh bread greeted her. Olivia was setting plates on the small kitchen table. "I hope you slept well," she said, glancing up. "It's not much, but there's bread I baked yesterday and some preserves." "It looks wonderful," Fiona assured her, taking a seat. "And yes, I slept better than I expected to, all things considered." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Olivia spoke again. "I should tell you a bit about my brother before he arrives." She set down her coffee cup, her expression thoughtful. "Owen is not always easy to read. He keeps his thoughts close, especially around strangers." "That seems prudent in these parts," Fiona observed. "Yes, but it's more than that with him." Olivia leaned forward slightly. "Our parents died when we were young. I was 12. Owen was 17. He took on the responsibility of providing for us both, worked himself to exhaustion on other men's ranches until he could save enough to buy his own plot of land." She paused. "What he did for you yesterday, that's who he is. He has a strong sense of right and wrong, and he doesn't hesitate to act on it. But don't mistake his quiet nature for indifference." Fiona absorbed this information, thinking it aligned with her initial impression of the man. "He mentioned that strangers had helped him once." Olivia nodded. "After our parents died, a rancher named Joseph Miller took Owen under his wing, taught him everything he knows about cattle and horses. When Joseph passed away 5 years ago, he left Owen enough money to purchase the land he has now." Her eyes held Fiona's. "Owen believes in paying forward the kindness he received. That's why he helped you." The sound of boots on the stairs interrupted their conversation. Moments later, Owen appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. He nodded a greeting to both women. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority Fiona remembered from yesterday. "I hope you rested well, Miss Sullivan." "Please call me Fiona," she replied. "And yes, thanks to your sister's hospitality." Owen accepted a cup of coffee from Olivia and took a seat at the table. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, direct as ever. "My offer still stands, work at the ranch in exchange for room and board, but I want to be clear about what that entails." He went on to explain that his ranch, the Double Creek, was modest compared to some of the larger spreads in the territory. He ran cattle primarily, with a small horse breeding operation on the side. There was a main house, a bunkhouse for the few hands he employed, a barn, and various outbuildings. The work would be what you'd expect: cooking, cleaning, mending. Some garden work as well if you're inclined. In exchange, you'd have your own room in the main house, meals, and a small stipend each month. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. I understand if this isn't what you envisioned for yourself, but it would be honest work with decent conditions, and you'd be treated with respect. Fiona considered his offer. She had few illusions about the limited options available to a woman alone in the West. Domestic service was one of the few respectable paths, and from what Owen described, the conditions would be far better than most. Before I accept, she said carefully, I need to know more about you, Mr. Ingram. I'd be placing a great deal of trust in a man I've just met. A hint of approval flickered across Owen's features at her caution. That's fair, he acknowledged. Ask whatever you need to. Over the next hour, Fiona learned that Owen was 32 years old, had been running his ranch for 5 years, and employed 3 full-time hands, with additional help hired during calving and roundup seasons. He was respected in the community, evidenced by how quickly the crowd had backed down yesterday, and had served briefly as a deputy, before focusing entirely on his ranch. Olivia occasionally interjected with details her brother omitted, painting a picture of a man who was fair, hardworking, and principled if somewhat reserved. "And there's no Mrs. Ingram?" Fiona asked, the question necessary despite its potential impropriety. "No," Owen replied simply. "Never found the time for courting." Olivia snorted softly. "What my brother means is that he's been too busy building his ranch to notice when women show interest, which happens more often than he realizes." Owen shot his sister a look that might have been exasperation before turning back to Fiona. "To be clear, Miss Sullivan, Fiona, my offer of employment is just that. You would be my housekeeper, nothing more. Your reputation would be protected by Olivia's regular visits, and by the fact that there are always ranch hands about." Fiona nodded slowly, weighing her decision. In truth, she had few alternatives. She could seek employment in town, perhaps at one of the hotels or restaurants, but such positions were scarce and often came with their own risks. She could try to make her way to a larger city, but that required resources she didn't have. "I accept your offer, Mr. Ingram," she said finally. "On one condition." His eyebrows rose slightly. "And that is, that you allow me to work toward repaying the debt my father owed the one you settled. I know you said you don't expect repayment, but my own sense of honor requires it." Owen studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. Though I insist that any repayment come from your stipend only after your own needs are met. I won't have you going without necessities to settle a debt I freely took on." With the terms agreed upon, Owen suggested they depart for the ranch within the hour. "I have a wagon outside. We can stop by your homestead on the way if there are belongings you wish to collect." Fiona's throat tightened at the thought of returning to the home where she had grown up, now empty of her parents' presence. "Yes," she managed. "There are some things I couldn't bear to leave behind." While Owen waited downstairs, Olivia helped Fiona prepare for the journey, providing a small valise for whatever possessions she might retrieve and insisting she take a shawl against the morning chill. "I'll visit in a few days to see how you're settling in," Olivia promised as they descended the stairs. "And remember, if you need anything at all, Owen will bring you to town or send one of the hands with a message." Outside, Owen had readied a wagon, his gray stallion tethered behind it. He helped Fiona up onto the seat, his grip firm and steadying, before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they pulled away from Montana City, Fiona couldn't help glancing back at the Gilded Nugget Saloon, where just yesterday her future had hung in the balance. A shiver ran through her, not from the morning air but from how close she had come to a fate she dared not contemplate too deeply. "Cold?" Owen asked, misinterpreting her reaction. "No," Fiona replied honestly, "just grateful." Owen's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Let's get your belongings and then head home," he said. The word home hanging between them, a simple term that now held layers of complexity for Fiona. The wagon rattled on, carrying her away from the life she had lost, and toward one she had never imagined. The Sullivan homestead looked smaller somehow as they approached it, the modest cabin and outbuildings standing silent under the vast Montana sky. Fields that should have been planted with spring wheat lay fallow, a visceral reminder of all that had changed in the weeks since her parents' passing. Owen brought the wagon to a halt in the yard, dust settling around the wheels as Fiona stared at what had once been her home. Emotion welled up, threatening to overwhelm her, but she swallowed it back, determined to maintain her composure. "Take all the time you need," Owen said quietly, seeming to understand the significance of the moment without her having to explain. Fiona nodded gratefully and climbed down from the wagon. Her steps were measured as she approached the cabin, each one carrying the weight of memory. The door creaked familiarly as she pushed it open, revealing the interior largely as she had left it, though someone likely Hargrove's men had rummaged through drawers and cabinets, presumably looking for anything of value. Owen remained outside, giving her privacy as she moved through the rooms, selecting items to take with her. Her mother's hairbrush and hand mirror, a small wooden box containing a few pieces of modest jewelry, a quilt her grandmother had made. From her father's things, she took only his pocket watch and a worn Bible with the family history inscribed inside in her own room. She gathered clothing, 2 dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, a book of poetry she had particularly loved. Everything fit into the valise Olivia had provided, and a small cloth bundle she fashioned from a bedsheet. As she prepared to leave, Fiona paused at the threshold, allowing herself one final moment to say goodbye to the only home she had ever known. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath as if trying to capture the essence of the place to carry with her. "Ready?" Owen asked when she emerged, her few possessions clutched in her hands. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find that she meant it. This place held her past. Her future lay elsewhere now. Owen took the bundles from her and placed them carefully in the wagon before helping her up onto the seat once more. As they pulled away, Fiona did not look back. The journey to Double Creek Ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and stands of pine, the distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop. Owen pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a creek that never ran dry even in the worst droughts, a hill where wild horses sometimes gathered, the boundaries of his property when they finally crossed onto his land. "There it is," he said eventually, nodding toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley where 2 creeks converged. Double Creek. The ranch was modest compared to some of the sprawling operations Fiona had heard about, but it was well maintained, with solid structures and fenced paddocks. As they drew closer, she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides and several horses in a corral near the barn. The main house was built of logs with a stone chimney, larger than her family's cabin but not ostentatiously so. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, and smoke curled from the chimney, indicating that someone had kept a fire going in their absence. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached ranch hands, Fiona presumed, curious about their employer's return and the unexpected visitor he brought with him. Owen halted the wagon in front of the house and set the brake before turning to Fiona. My foreman, Charlie, and two of my hands, Ben and Miguel, he explained, nodding toward the approaching men. Good workers, all of them. They know to treat you with respect. The men tipped their hats as Owen made introductions, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something else Fiona couldn't quite name, surprise, perhaps, that their employer had returned with a woman. Miss Sullivan will be taking charge of the house, Owen informed them in a tone that invited no questions. She'll be cooking and keeping things in order. Charlie, a weathered man in his 40s with a gray streaked beard, nodded. About time we had decent cooking around here, he said with a half smile toward Fiona. Welcome to Double Creek, miss. Owen dismissed the men back to their work and helped Fiona down from the wagon. Charlie lives in the bunkhouse with the others, but takes his meals in the main house with me, he explained as he gathered her belongings. Ben and Miguel usually eat in the bunkhouse unless it's a special occasion. The interior of the house was clean but spartanly furnished, with a large common room containing a stone fireplace, a dining table with chairs and several wooden armchairs. A kitchen occupied one end of the space, equipped with a cast iron stove, a pump sink, and various cooking implements. My room is there, Owen indicated a door off the common room, and yours will be here. He led her to another door, opening it to reveal a modest bedroom with a single bed, a dresser, a small table, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It's not fancy, he said, seeming almost apologetic, but it's private and warm. It's more than adequate, Fiona assured him, touched by his concern. Thank you. Owen showed her the rest of the house, a pantry stocked with staples, a root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, a small room off the kitchen that served as a laundry area. Throughout the tour, Fiona noted things that needed attention: curtains that wanted mending, floors that could use a good scrubbing, the general air of a home maintained by men who prioritized function over comfort. I usually handle the cooking, Owen told her as they returned to the kitchen, but I won't pretend I'm much good at it. Charlie helps when he can, but he's needed more with the cattle. I'm happy to take over the cooking immediately, Fiona offered. My mother taught me well and I enjoy it. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. That would be welcome. I've subjected my men to my cooking long enough. They settled into a routine more quickly than Fiona had anticipated. That very evening, she prepared a simple but hearty meal of salt pork, beans, and biscuits, using ingredients from the pantry. Owen and Charlie ate with evident appreciation, both men thanking her with a sincerity that suggested they had indeed been subsisting on far less palatable fare. After supper, Owen showed her where the household accounts were kept, a leather-bound ledger in a drawer of the desk in the common room. I'm not much for bookkeeping, he admitted. If you have a head for figures, I'd welcome your help with this as well. Fiona examined the ledger, noting Owen's neat but basic entries. My father taught me how to keep accounts for our farm, she said. I'd be happy to take this on too. That night, as Fiona lay in her new bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak of the house settling, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had faced the prospect of being sold to the highest bidder. Now she was installed as housekeeper on a respectable ranch, with honest work and a safe place to sleep. She still grieved for her parents, still felt the ache of all she had lost, but for the first time since their deaths, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope for the future. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through the darkest days. Outside her window, the vast Montana sky glittered with stars, and somewhere in the distance, A coyote called to its mate, a lonely sound that nevertheless spoke of life continuing, adapting, finding its way forward. Days at Double Creek settled into a rhythm that Fiona found both comforting and satisfying. She rose before dawn to kindle the fire in the stove and prepare breakfast for Owen and Charlie, who would already be out tending to the early morning chores. By the time they came in, stamping dust from their boots and hanging their hats on pegs by the door, hot coffee, biscuits, and eggs or porridge would be waiting. After breakfast, Fiona turned her attention to the house itself. There was much to be done, months, perhaps years, of masculine neglect to undo. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, mended curtains and linens, organized the pantry, and slowly transformed the functional but bare interior into something more homelike. Owen noticed her efforts, though he said little beyond the occasional "looks nice" or "much better now." But Fiona observed how he began to linger longer at the table after meals, how he seemed to take more care about tracking dirt into the house, how his eyes sometimes followed her as she moved about the rooms, curious and perhaps a bit bewildered by the changes she was making. For his part, Owen was a fair employer. He never raised his voice, never complained about her work, and seemed genuinely appreciative of her cooking and housekeeping. He respected her privacy, knocked before entering any room she might be occupying, and made it clear to his men that they were to treat her with the utmost courtesy. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away and the kitchen put in order, Owen often invited her to sit by the fire while he went over the day's business or planned for the next. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, about books they had read, about news from town that Charlie or one of the other hands had brought back. Other times they sat in companionable silence, Owen cleaning a saddle or mending tack while Fiona sewed or knitted. It was during these quiet evenings that Fiona began to see beyond the reserved exterior Owen presented to the world. She noticed his careful attention to detail when checking the ranch ledger, his thoughtfulness when planning how to distribute work among his men, the quiet pride he took in the condition of his horses and cattle. 2 weeks after her arrival at Double Creek, Olivia made good on her promise to visit. She arrived mid-morning, bringing mail from town and news of local happenings. The sisters-in-law embraced warmly, and Fiona felt a surprising surge of pleasure at seeing a friendly female face after days in the company of men. "The place looks transformed," Olivia remarked, glancing around the common room, where Fiona had added touches of color with wildflowers in mason jars and freshly laundered cushions on the chairs. "I've been telling Owen for years that this house needed a woman's touch." Owen, who had come in from the corrals to greet his sister, merely grunted at this, but Fiona caught the hint of amusement in his eyes. "How are things in town?" he asked, accepting the mail Olivia had brought. "Mostly quiet," Olivia replied, "though there's talk about Hargrove. Seems he's been called to Helena to answer some questions about his banking practices." She glanced at Fiona. "Apparently, yours wasn't the only case where he attempted to settle debts through unconventional means." A chill ran through Fiona at the thought of other women who might have faced the same fate she nearly had. "I hope they hold him accountable," she said quietly. "If there's any justice, they will," Owen agreed, his jaw tightening. He turned to his sister. "Will you stay for dinner?" "Fiona makes a beef stew that puts anything at the hotel to shame." Olivia readily agreed, and the three of them spent a pleasant afternoon together. Fiona prepared the promised stew while Olivia helped knead dough for bread, the two women chatting easily as they worked. Owen excused himself to attend to ranch business but returned in time to join them for the meal. As they ate, Olivia regaled them with town gossip, who was courting whom, which businesses were thriving, the ongoing debate about whether Montana City needed a proper school building. Fiona found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, the weight of recent events temporarily lifted by the simple pleasure of good company. After dinner, while Owen and Olivia continued talking by the fire, Fiona slipped outside to enjoy the evening air. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, while the first stars began to appear overhead. She wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and walked to the edge of the porch, taking in the peaceful scene before her horses grazing in the near pasture, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, the distant silhouettes of cattle against the hillside. She didn't hear Owen approach until he spoke. "Beautiful evening." Fiona startled slightly before turning to face him. "Yes, it is. I'm sorry I didn't mean to abandon your sister." "She understands," Owen said, moving to stand beside her at the porch railing. "She's inside gathering her things. She wants to get back to town before full dark." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape. Fiona was acutely aware of Owen's presence beside her, the solid breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him, the quiet strength he emanated without effort. "Are you comfortable here?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "Is there anything you need that you haven't mentioned?" The question surprised Fiona, both in its directness and its apparent concern for her well-being beyond the basic necessities. "I'm very comfortable," she assured him. "Everyone has been kind and the work. It feels good to be useful again." Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Good, I wanted to be sure." He hesitated, then added, "You've made a difference here, Fiona. The house hasn't felt this much like a home since, well, ever." The admission, simple though it was, touched something deep within her. Before she could respond, Olivia appeared in the doorway, ready to depart. Owen drove his sister back to town in the wagon, leaving Fiona to finish the evening chores and reflect on their brief conversation. Something had shifted between them. She felt a subtle change in the air, as if they had moved from employer and employee to something not yet defined but potentially more significant. Spring progressed into summer, bringing longer days filled with ranch work. Owen and his men were busy from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, tending to the cattle, breaking horses for sale. Fiona's responsibilities expanded as well. She planted a vegetable garden near the house, helped with the preservation of early fruits and vegetables, and took on mending jobs for all the ranch hands, who were grateful to have their shirts and pants repaired by skilled hands rather than their own clumsy stitches. On particularly hot days, Owen insisted that Fiona take a break during the afternoon hours when the house became stifling. During one such afternoon in late July, she decided to walk to the creek that ran behind the house, seeking relief from the heat. She had discovered a small pool there, shaded by cottonwoods, where the water was deep enough for wading with her skirts hitched up and her feet bare. Fiona stepped carefully into the cool water, sighing with pleasure as it swirled around her ankles and calves. She had left her hair loose, and the slight breeze lifted strands from her neck, providing additional relief from the oppressive heat. Lost in the simple pleasure of the moment, she didn't immediately notice the approaching rider. It was only when a horse whinnied nearby that she looked up to see Owen sitting astride his gray stallion at the edge of the trees, watching her. Embarrassment flooded her to be caught in such a state of dishabille, even if only her lower legs were exposed, was mortifying. She quickly stepped out of the water, letting her skirts fall back into place. "I'm sorry," Owen said immediately, averting his eyes. "I didn't mean to intrude. I often stop here to water my horse on hot days." "No, I should apologize," Fiona replied, feeling her cheeks flame. "I didn't think anyone would come this way." Owen dismounted, leading his horse to the creek's edge to drink. He kept a respectful distance from Fiona, his manner deliberately casual as if to put her at ease. "It's a good spot," he said. "Cool even in this heat." Fiona nodded, acutely conscious of her bare feet and unbound hair. She should excuse herself, return to the house, restore the proper distance between them. But something held her there, perhaps the peaceful setting, perhaps the rare opportunity to speak with Owen away from the demands of the ranch. "How is the new colt doing?" she asked, referring to a foal born the previous week that had initially struggled to nurse. Owen's expression brightened, as it often did when discussing his horses. "Much better. Started feeding properly yesterday. He'll be fine now, I think." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "How did you know I was worried about him?" Fiona smiled slightly. "You checked on him 3 times during dinner last night, and I heard you get up before dawn to go to the barn." A look of surprise crossed Owen's features, followed by something else, respect, perhaps, or appreciation that she had noticed. "You're observant." "My mother always said that paying attention was the most useful skill a person could have," Fiona replied, memories of her mother briefly surfacing. She noticed everything: when the weather was about to change, when animals were sickening, when people needed help before they asked for it. Owen nodded thoughtfully. "A valuable trait," he agreed. "My father was the same way, could read people and animals better than anyone I've known." He paused, then added, "You remind me of him sometimes." Coming from Owen, Fiona understood this was a significant compliment. "Thank you," she said simply. They fell into conversation then, more freely than they had before, discussing the ranch, memories of their parents, books they had enjoyed. Owen revealed that he had initially hoped to become a veterinarian, but lacked the means for formal education. So he had learned what he could from books and experience. Fiona shared her own unrealized dream of becoming a teacher, a path that had seemed possible until her parents' illness changed everything. "I still read whatever I can get my hands on," she admitted. "Your bookshelf has been a blessing." "Take whatever you like from it," Owen offered. "Most were Joseph Miller's, the man who helped me get started. He believed education never stopped, no matter where life took you." As they talked, the initial awkwardness of their encounter faded, replaced by a growing ease in each other's company. The sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the creek. Eventually, Owen glanced at the sky and sighed. "I should get back," he said, reluctance evident in his tone. "Charlie will be wondering where I've gone." Fiona nodded, suddenly aware of how long they had been talking and how much she had enjoyed it. "Of course. I should finish preparing supper." Owen mounted his horse with the fluid grace she had come to associate with him, then looked down at her, his expression difficult to read in the dappled light filtering through the trees. "Perhaps you might join me here again sometime," he suggested, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty she had never heard from him before. "When the heat of the day makes the house unbearable." Fiona felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest, not fear or anxiety, but a kind of anticipation. "Perhaps I might," she agreed, her own voice soft. With a nod and the barest suggestion of a smile, Owen turned his horse and rode back toward the ranch, leaving Fiona to gather her shoes and stockings and follow at her own pace, her mind filled with the unexpected pleasure of their conversation and the possibility of more to come. That evening, as Fiona served supper to Owen and Charlie, she was acutely conscious of Owen's presence in a way she hadn't been before. She noticed the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it was too long, the careful precision of his movements as he handled knife and fork. When their eyes met briefly over the table, A flush of warmth spread through her, and she quickly looked away, busying herself with refilling water glasses. Charlie, observant in his quiet way, glanced between them with a knowing expression but made no comment, focusing instead on complimenting Fiona's cooking and discussing the next day's work with Owen. After Charlie had returned to the bunkhouse for the night, Fiona went about her usual routine of cleaning up from supper while Owen settled at the table with the ranch ledger and a cup of coffee. The familiar domestic scene felt different somehow, charged with an awareness that hadn't been there before. When Fiona had finished with the dishes, she hesitated, unsure whether to retire to her room as she usually did or to join Owen at the table as she sometimes did when there was mending to be done. Before she could decide, Owen looked up from the ledger. "Would you sit for a while?" he asked, his tone casual though his eyes held a question. "I have something to discuss with you." Fiona nodded and took the chair opposite him, smoothing her apron nervously. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Owen assured her. "I just wanted to let you know that I'll be taking a trip to Helena next week. There's a livestock auction I need to attend and some business with the bank." He paused. "I'll be gone for about 10 days. "I see," Fiona said, surprised at the pang of disappointment she felt. "Will Charlie be in charge while you're away?" Owen nodded. "He knows what needs doing, but I wanted to ask if you'd be comfortable staying here with just the men around. Olivia has offered to have you stay with her in town if you prefer." The consideration touched Fiona. "I appreciate the concern, but I'll be fine here. There's preserving to be done with the garden producing so well, and I trust Charlie and the others." She hesitated, then added, "This is my home now, too." Something flickered in Owen's eyes at her word's surprise, followed by a warmth that made Fiona's heart beat a little faster. "I'm glad you feel that way," he said quietly. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with things unsaid. Finally, Owen cleared his throat and returned his attention to the ledger. "I'll leave some extra money for household expenses while I'm gone, and if there's anything you need from town, make a list, and I'll bring it back with me." Fiona recognized the shift back to practical matters and accepted it, though part of her wondered what might have been said if they had continued down the other path. "Thank you. I'll think about what we need." That night, as Fiona lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the afternoon by the creek, to the ease of conversation with Owen, to the way his presence affected her in ways she hadn't expected. She had come to Double Creek as an employee, grateful for safe haven and honest work. When had that gratitude begun to transform into something more complex, more personal? Owen's departure the following week left a noticeable void at Double Creek. Though Charlie managed the ranch capably in his absence, meals were quieter, evenings longer, and Fiona found herself watching the road more often than was strictly necessary, even though she knew Owen wouldn't return for at least 10 days. She filled her time with work harvesting vegetables from the garden, preserving peaches and berries, deep cleaning rooms that had seen only surface attention before. In the evenings, she read from Owen's bookshelf or worked on a quilt she had started, using scraps of fabric Olivia had brought from town. 8 days into Owen's absence, a letter arrived from Olivia, brought by one of the town merchants who occasionally delivered mail to outlying ranches. Fiona opened it eagerly, hoping for news from Owen, but found instead an invitation to join Olivia for the town's summer social the following weekend. "Owen will be back by then," Olivia had written, "and I know he won't think to attend unless someone reminds him. It would do you both good to enjoy some company and perhaps even dance a bit. Say you'll come." Fiona smiled at Olivia's enthusiasm, but felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of attending a social event. She had no proper dress for such an occasion, and while she had grown comfortable with the small circle at Double Creek, the prospect of facing the wider community, some of whom had witnessed her near auction, was daunting. Still, the idea of seeing Owen in a different context, perhaps even dancing with him, held undeniable appeal. Fiona found herself examining the best of her dresses that evening, considering what alterations might make it suitable for a social gathering. The day of Owen's expected return dawned clear and warm. Fiona rose earlier than usual, putting extra care into preparing a special welcome-home dinner: roast beef, potato dumplings, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. She also took more care than usual with her appearance, pinning her hair in a style that framed her face softly, and choosing her blue dress, which she had recently altered to better fit her now slightly fuller figure, the result of regular meals after weeks of near starvation following her parents' deaths. By mid-afternoon, with dinner preparations well underway and no sign of Owen, Fiona began to grow concerned. Charlie assured her that delays were common when traveling. Roads could be bad. Business could take longer than expected. Any number of things might have held Owen up. "He'll be here when he gets here," the foreman said philosophically. "No sense in worrying until there's something to worry about." Fiona tried to take this advice to heart, but as the afternoon waned into evening with still no sign of Owen, her concern deepened. She had just decided to put the roast back in the warming oven to keep for later when the sound of hoofbeats in the yard sent her hurrying to the window. Owen dismounted wearily from his horse, his clothes dusty from the road, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. But when he looked up and saw Fiona watching from the window, his expression brightened visibly, some of the exhaustion seeming to fall away. Fiona hurried to the door, opening it as Owen reached the porch steps. "Welcome back," she said, unable to keep the relief and pleasure from her voice. "We were beginning to worry. Bad stretch of road near Three Forks slowed us down," Owen explained, removing his hat as he stepped inside. The "us" referred to his stallion, Fiona knew, as he often spoke of his horse as a partner rather than a possession. "Something smells wonderful." "I made roast beef," Fiona said, suddenly shy. "And apple pie. I thought, after days of travel food, you might appreciate a proper meal." Owen's eyes met hers, holding for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I've been thinking about your cooking for days," he admitted, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That and a hot bath were what kept me going on the last stretch." Fiona felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "The water's already heating," she said. "Supper will be ready when you are." As Owen bathed and changed in his room, Fiona put the finishing touches on the meal, her heart inexplicably light. Charlie joined them for supper, eager to hear about Owen's trip and the results of the livestock auction. Throughout the meal, Fiona was aware of Owen's gaze returning to her more often than usual, a thoughtful expression in his eyes that made her wonder what he was thinking. Had his absence affected him as it had her? Had he missed the ranch, missed their evening conversations, missed her? After Charlie had gone and the kitchen was put to rights, Owen invited Fiona to join him by the fire, where he presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought this back from Helena," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as he handed it to her. "Saw it in a shop window and thought of you." Surprised and touched by the unexpected gift, Fiona carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully bound book of poetry, Tennyson's collected works, with gilt-edged pages and a soft leather cover. "Owen," she breathed, running her fingers reverently over the embossed title. "It's beautiful, but you shouldn't have. I wanted to," he interrupted gently. You mentioned that poetry was your favorite, and I noticed you'd read through all the volumes here at least twice." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to Fiona's eyes. That he had remembered such a small detail, that he had taken time during his business trip to select something specifically for her, it spoke volumes about his character and, perhaps, about his feelings. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." Owen nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "I stopped in Montana City on my way back and saw Olivia. She mentioned the social this weekend." Fiona looked up from the book, her pulse quickening. "Yes, she wrote to me about it." "Would you like to go?" Owen asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I don't much care for such gatherings myself, but if you'd enjoy it." "I would," Fiona admitted, "though I don't have anything suitable to wear for a social. And—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "People will talk seeing me thereafter, after what happened in town." Owen's expression hardened slightly at the reminder of her near auction. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. As for a dress—" He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small pouch, placing it on the table between them. "Your wages for the past month, plus a bit extra. Olivia suggested you might want to visit the dressmaker in town before the social." Fiona stared at the pouch, conflicting emotions washing over her. The money was rightfully hers, she had earned it with her labor. But the bit extra felt dangerously close to charity, something her pride still struggled to accept. Owen seemed to read her thoughts. "The extra is an advance," he clarified. "You've more than earned it with how you've transformed this place. And—" He paused, something like vulnerability flashing in his eyes before he mastered it. "And I'd like to see you enjoy yourself at the social. It would please me to escort you there properly attired as you deserve to be." Put that way, how could she refuse? Fiona reached for the pouch, her fingers brushing Owen's as she did so. The brief contact sent a shiver of awareness through her, and from the way Owen's breath caught, she suspected he felt it too. "Thank you," she said again. "I accept." Both the wages and the escort to the social. The smile that crossed Owen's face then was unlike any she had seen from him before, open, genuinely pleased, transforming his usually serious features into something that made Fiona's heart skip a beat. "Good," he said simply. That night, Fiona fell asleep with the book of poetry beside her pillow and dreams of dancing with Owen Ingram weaving through her mind. The day before the social, Owen drove Fiona into Montana City to visit Olivia and the dressmaker. The siblings' reunion was warm, with Olivia embracing her brother before turning her attention to Fiona. "You look wonderful," Olivia declared, holding Fiona at arm's length to examine her. "Country life agrees with you. There's color in your cheeks and you've filled out a bit. Hasn't she, Owen?" Owen, clearly uncomfortable with such direct discussion of Fiona's appearance, merely nodded, though his eyes lingered on her face for a moment before he excused himself to attend to business in town. "Men," Olivia sighed as she linked her arm with Fiona's and led her toward the dressmaker's shop. "They notice everything but pretend they don't. Now, tell me honestly, how are things at the ranch? Is my brother behaving himself?" Fiona assured her that all was well, though she found herself blushing when Olivia gave her a knowing look. "You've grown fond of him," Olivia observed, not a question but a statement. "He's been very kind," Fiona replied cautiously. "Owen is kind to his horses too," Olivia pointed out with a smile. "But he doesn't buy them poetry books or advance their wages so they can buy pretty dresses." Fiona's blush deepened. "You know about that. Who do you think suggested it?" Olivia laughed. "Though I must say I didn't expect him to take my advice about the book. That was all Owen." She squeezed Fiona's arm gently. "He likes you, Fiona, more than he's liked anyone in a very long time. Perhaps ever." The possibility both thrilled and terrified Fiona. "I'm his housekeeper," she reminded Olivia and herself. "He rescued me from a terrible situation. Gratitude could easily be mistaken for other feelings." Olivia's expression softened. "Is that what you think this is?" Gratitude? Fiona considered the question honestly. Was that all she felt for Owen? Gratitude for his rescue, appreciation for his kindness? Or was it something more, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, how she treasured their conversations, the comfort she found in his steady presence? "No," she admitted finally. "It's not just gratitude, but it's complicated." "Love usually is," Olivia said simply, then brightened as they reached the dressmaker's shop. "Now, let's find you a dress that will make my brother forget every complicated thing except how beautiful you are." The dressmaker, Mrs. Reynolds, was a cheerful widow who clucked sympathetically when Fiona explained her need for a dress appropriate for the social with only 1 day's notice. "Normally, I'd need at least a week for a proper fitting," she told them, "but I have a few ready-made dresses that might suit with minor alterations." She disappeared into a back room and returned with several gowns. After much discussion and trying on, they settled on a dress of deep green cotton with a fitted bodice, slightly puffed sleeves, and a modest bustle. The color brought out the auburn highlights in Fiona's hair and complemented her fair complexion. "This is perfect," Olivia declared as Mrs. Reynolds pinned the alterations needed to fit Fiona's slender frame. "Simple enough not to seem ostentatious, but elegant enough for a social. Owen won't be able to take his eyes off you." Fiona protested such a blatant statement of intent, but secretly, she hoped Olivia was right. The thought of Owen seeing her in something other than her everyday work dresses, of perhaps admiring how she looked, sent a thrill of anticipation through her. Mrs. Reynolds promised to have the dress ready by noon the following day, and the women left the shop to meet Owen for lunch at the hotel dining room. As they crossed the street, Fiona became aware of curious glances from townsfolk who recognized her from the auction incident. Some looks were sympathetic, others speculative, a few openly hostile. Olivia, noticing Fiona's discomfort, linked arms with her more firmly. "Ignore them," she advised in a low voice. "Half of them are jealous that you're living at Double Creek with the most eligible bachelor in the county, and the other half are just busybodies who need something to gossip about." "I'm not living with him in that sense," Fiona protested, her cheeks burning. "I'm his employee." "Of course you are," Olivia agreed soothingly. "But that doesn't stop people from talking. The best thing you can do is hold your head high and show them you have nothing to be ashamed of." Fiona straightened her shoulders, taking Olivia's advice to heart. She had done nothing wrong, had survived circumstances that would have broken many, and had rebuilt a life for herself through honest work. If people chose to gossip, that was their failing, not hers. Owen was waiting for them at the hotel, and Fiona couldn't help but notice how his expression brightened when he saw them approach. He held the door for them, his hand brushing Fiona's back lightly as she passed, a simple courtesy, yet one that sent a flutter of awareness through her. Lunch was a pleasant affair, with Olivia carrying most of the conversation, updating them on town news and sharing anecdotes from the telegraph office. Owen was quieter but seemed relaxed, occasionally contributing to the discussion, and once or twice catching Fiona's eye with a small smile that seemed meant only for her. Afterward, while Owen went to purchase supplies for the ranch, Olivia took Fiona to the general store to select gloves and a ribbon for her hair to complement her new dress. As they were paying for their purchases, the shop door opened, and a hush fell over the usually chattering customers. Fiona turned to see Hargrove, the banker, standing in the doorway. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face gaunt and his once immaculate suit showing signs of wear. His eyes swept the store, then locked on Fiona with a flash of recognition followed by unmistakable malice. Olivia stepped slightly in front of Fiona, her posture protective. "Mr. Hargrove," she acknowledged coolly, "I understood you were in Helena." "I was," he replied, his voice tight. "The proceedings concluded yesterday." He did not elaborate on the outcome, but his disheveled appearance suggested it had not gone in his favor. His gaze shifted back to Fiona. "Miss Sullivan, I see you've landed on your feet." There was no mistaking the bitterness in his tone. Before Fiona could respond, the shop door opened again, and Owen entered. He took in the scene at a glance: Hargrove, Fiona's pale face, Olivia's protective stance, and moved immediately to Fiona's side. "Hargrove," he said, the single word carrying a weight of warning. The banker's expression soured further, but something like fear flickered in his eyes. "Ingram, still interfering in other people's business, I see." "Only when that business involves taking advantage of those who can't defend themselves," Owen replied evenly. "Are you ready to leave?" He asked Fiona and Olivia, deliberately turning his back on Hargrove. They nodded, gathering their purchases. As they moved toward the door, Hargrove stepped aside, but not without a parting shot. "Enjoy your new position, Miss Sullivan," he said, the innuendo clear in his tone. "Though I wonder if it's really so different from what I was offering after all." Owen's reaction was immediate and controlled. He handed his packages to Olivia, then turned back to Hargrove, his expression dangerously calm. In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them, seized the banker by the lapels of his shabby suit, and propelled him against the nearest wall. "Apologize to the lady," Owen said quietly, his voice all the more threatening for its lack of volume. Hargrove, his face now ashen, stammered, I meant no offense." "That's not an apology," Owen pressed, his grip tightening. "I apologize, Miss Sullivan," Hargrove managed, his eyes darting between Owen's implacable face and the stunned onlookers. Owen released him then, stepping back with a contempt that was palpable. "If you ever speak to or about Miss Sullivan again," he said, still in that deceptively calm voice, "you will answer to me. Is that clear?" Hargrove nodded jerkily, straightening his rumpled suit with shaking hands. Owen turned back to Fiona and Olivia, his expression softening as he took his packages from Olivia and offered his arm to Fiona. "Shall we?" As they left the store, Fiona was aware of the whispers that would inevitably follow, but for once, she didn't care. Owen's defense of her honor had been so immediate, so unquestioning, that it overshadowed any embarrassment she might have felt. "You shouldn't have done that," she said as they walked back toward the wagon, though there was no real admonishment in her tone. "Now everyone will talk even more." "Let them," Owen replied, his jaw still set. What he implied was unacceptable. "Besides," Olivia added cheerfully, "if they're going to gossip anyway, better it be about how my brother defended your honor rather than whatever nasty implications Hargrove was making." Fiona couldn't argue with that logic, though she was still processing Owen's reaction. It had been protective, certainly, as one might expect from an employer concerned for his employee's reputation. But there had been something more in his eyes when he confronted Hargrove, something personal, almost possessive. It left Fiona wondering, once again, about the true nature of Owen's feelings toward her. That evening, as they drove back to Double Creek, a comfortable silence settled between them. The confrontation with Hargrove had cleared the air somehow, bringing into sharper relief the bonds forming between them, bonds that went beyond employer and employee. As the ranch came into view, silhouetted against the setting sun, Fiona felt a surge of emotion. This place that had been a refuge of necessity had become, without her quite realizing it, a home she cherished, with a man she was coming to care for deeply at its center. Owen, as if sensing her thoughts, glanced at her profile in the golden light. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Fiona turned to meet his gaze, allowing herself to fully acknowledge the warmth that rose within her whenever he looked at her this way. "Yes," she said simply. "Everything is just right." The night of the social arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for an outdoor gathering. Fiona spent extra time preparing for the event, washing her hair with rosemary-scented water and letting it dry in the sun until it shone with auburn highlights. She arranged it in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face, and the blue ribbon Olivia had helped her select woven through the knot at the back of her head. The green dress fit perfectly, thanks to Mrs. Reynolds' skilled alterations. It accentuated Fiona's slender waist while providing a modest décolletage that revealed just enough to be fashionable without crossing into impropriety. The matching gloves completed the ensemble, making Fiona feel more elegant than she had in months. When she emerged from her room, Owen was waiting in the common area, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His usually unruly hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. He turned at the sound of her door, and the expression that crossed his face made all Fiona's preparations worthwhile. His eyes widened slightly, then warmed with unmistakable admiration as they traveled from her face to the green dress and back again. "Fiona," he said, his voice husky, "you look beautiful." The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought a blush to her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied softly. "You look very handsome yourself." Owen cleared his throat, seeming almost embarrassed by the exchange of compliments. "We should go," he said. "Charlie's bringing the buggy around." The ride to Montana City was filled with anticipation. Owen pointed out constellations appearing in the darkening sky, and Fiona shared stories of her childhood attendance at similar gatherings back when her parents were alive. The easy conversation helped calm her nerves about facing the town's residents en masse for the first time since her near auction. The social was being held in the open area behind the church, where tables had been set up for food, lanterns hung from ropes strung between trees, and a small platform erected for the musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and an accordionist who also served as the town's barber. As Owen helped Fiona down from the buggy, she took a deep breath to steady herself. "Remember," he said quietly, seeming to sense her anxiety, "you have nothing to be ashamed of, and I'll be right beside you." With his hand placed lightly at the small of her back, Owen guided Fiona through the gathering crowd. Heads turned as they passed, conversations paused, and Fiona felt the weight of curious eyes upon them. But Owen's steady presence beside her gave her the courage to hold her head high, even managing to smile and nod at a few familiar faces. Olivia rushed to greet them, resplendent in a blue dress that complemented her dark hair and eyes. "You look stunning," she told Fiona, embracing her warmly. "That color is perfect on you." She winked at her brother. "Doesn't she look beautiful, Owen?" "She does," Owen agreed, the simple declaration carrying more weight for its lack of elaboration. Olivia introduced them to friends and acquaintances, smoothing the way for Fiona's integration into the social gathering. Some people were openly friendly, others more reserved, but none were outright hostile, whether due to genuine acceptance or fear of Owen's reaction. Fiona couldn't be sure. As the evening progressed and the music began in earnest, Fiona found herself enjoying the social more than she had anticipated. The food was plentiful, the music lively, and the atmosphere festive. Owen remained attentive throughout, bringing her refreshments, introducing her to ranchers he did business with, and generally ensuring her comfort when the musicians struck up a waltz. Owen turned to Fiona, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Fiona placed her gloved hand in his, her heart beating a little faster at the prospect of being held in his arms, even in the formal context of a waltz. "I'd be delighted," she replied. Owen led her to the cleared area serving as a dance floor, where other couples were already beginning to move to the music. He placed one hand at her waist, holding her other hand in a proper dance position, and then they were moving, turning in time to the lilting melody. For a man of his size, Owen danced with surprising grace and confidence. Fiona followed his lead easily, their movements in harmony as they circled the improvised dance floor. The lantern light cast a golden glow over the scene. The evening air was sweet with the scent of late summer flowers, and for a few perfect minutes, there was nothing in the world but the music and the man before her. As the waltz continued, Owen drew her slightly closer, still proper by any standard, but intimate enough that Fiona could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him. When she looked up to meet his gaze, the intensity she found there made her breath catch. "Fiona," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I've been meaning to speak with you about something." Before he could continue, however, the music ended, and couples around them began to separate and applaud the musicians. The moment was broken, but the look they exchanged promised that the conversation would be resumed later. As the evening wore on, Fiona danced with several other men. Charlie, who proved surprisingly light on his feet for a man who spent most of his life on horseback. The town doctor, a kindly older gentleman who had attended her parents in their final illness, and even the young schoolteacher, who blushed furiously throughout their dance. But her thoughts remained with Owen, who watched from the sidelines, his eyes following her movements with an expression that made her heart flutter whenever she caught him looking. It was nearly midnight when Owen suggested they start for home, as they had a long ride ahead and the ranch would not run itself come morning. Fiona, though enjoying herself, was ready to leave. The social had been a success, but the constant awareness of being observed and discussed was taxing. They bid farewell to Olivia, who embraced them both and extracted a promise from Fiona to visit soon. As they walked to where their buggy was hitched, Owen's hand found the small of Fiona's back again, the light touch both protective and possessive. The ride home was quieter than the journey into town, a comfortable silence settling between them. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky, and a nearly full moon illuminated the road. Fiona felt a deep contentment wash over her. The evening had been a personal triumph, a reclaiming of her place in society after the humiliation of the auction incident. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence, "for taking me tonight. I enjoyed myself far more than I expected to." Owen glanced at her, his expression softened by the moonlight. "I'm glad," he replied. "You deserved a night of enjoyment after everything you've been through." He hesitated, then added, "You were the most beautiful woman there." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, warmed Fiona from within. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means a great deal coming from you." They were approaching the creek that ran near the ranch when Owen suddenly pulled the buggy to a halt. For a moment, Fiona was confused, wondering if something was wrong with the horse or the buggy. But Owen simply set the brake and turned toward her. "Earlier," he said, his voice rough with what might have been nervousness, "at the dance, I was going to tell you something." Fiona's heart began to beat faster. Yes. Owen removed his hat, setting it aside in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial, and took both her hands in his. "Fiona," he began, his voice steadier now, "when I first saw you on that wagon in town, about to be sold to men who would have treated you as property rather than as a person, I acted on instinct. I knew I had to stop it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I didn't know then was how much you would come to mean to me." Fiona's breath caught in her throat as Owen continued, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her gloved hands. "These past months, watching you turn my house into a home, seeing your strength and grace in the face of everything you've endured, it's shown me what I've been missing all these years." His eyes held hers, sincere and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I've grown to care for you, Fiona, deeply, more than I thought possible." Joy rose within Fiona, so intense it was almost painful. "Owen," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I care for you too, so much." The admission hung between them, momentous in its simplicity. Owen's expression softened further, hope and happiness transforming his usually serious features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a soft press of lips that spoke of respect as much as desire. But when Fiona responded, moving closer and raising one hand to rest against his chest, Owen deepened the kiss, one arm circling her waist to draw her nearer. Time seemed to stand still as they sat there in the moonlight, the only sounds the gentle rush of the creek nearby and the soft nickering of the horse. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. Fiona smiled, her heart full to bursting. "I'm glad you finally did." Owen brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. "I need you to understand something," he said, serious again. "What I feel for you, it has nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. You don't owe me anything for what happened in town that day. If anything, I'm the one who's grateful for how you've brought life and warmth back to my home, and to me." Tears pricked at Fiona's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. "I know," she assured him. "What I feel for you isn't gratitude either, it's—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. "It's love, Owen, I love you." The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between them, irrevocable and true. For a moment, Owen was silent, and Fiona feared she had been too bold, too direct. But then his arms tightened around her, and his voice, when he spoke, was rough with emotion. "I love you too, Fiona Sullivan," he said simply. "More than I have words to express." They shared another kiss, deeper and more passionate than the first, before Owen reluctantly released her and picked up the reins again. "We should get back," he said, though his reluctance was evident. "But this conversation isn't over." The remainder of the journey passed in a daze of happiness for Fiona. Everything seemed heightened, the beauty of the moonlit landscape, the scent of sage and pine in the night air, the solid presence of the man beside her, now no longer just her employer, but something far more significant. When they reached the ranch, Owen helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. The house was dark and quiet, the ranch hands long since retired to the bunkhouse. On the porch, they paused, neither quite ready to end the evening. Owen took her hands in his once more, his expression earnest in the silvery moonlight. "Fiona," he said quietly, "I know this is sudden, perhaps too sudden after everything you've been through, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I don't want you as my housekeeper, living under my roof in a position that might compromise your reputation or dignity. I want you as my wife if you'll have me." The proposal, though not entirely unexpected after their declarations by the creek, still took Fiona's breath away. "Owen," she began, emotion making her voice unsteady, "are you certain we've known each other only a few months?" "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "I know my own heart, Fiona, and it belongs to you, but," he added, "I don't expect an answer tonight. Take all the time you need to be sure. I'll wait." Touched by his consideration, by his willingness to put her needs before his desires, Fiona felt the last of her reservations melt away. "I don't need time," she said, squeezing his hands. "My answer is yes, Owen Ingram. I would be honored to be your wife." The joy that spread across Owen's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and transformative. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her slightly off her feet in his enthusiasm, before capturing her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of passion and devotion. When they finally parted, both breathless and laughing softly, Owen set her gently back on her feet but kept his arms around her waist. "We'll need to make arrangements," he said, practical even in his happiness. "Would you prefer a small ceremony here at the ranch, or something more formal in town?" "Small," Fiona replied without hesitation. "Just family and close friends, here at Double Creek, which has already become home to me." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "I only wish my parents could be here to see it." Owen's expression softened with understanding. "They would be proud of you," he said gently, "of your strength and courage, and I promise you, Fiona, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me today." With one last kiss, tender and full of promise, they finally entered the house. Though they parted to their separate rooms, both knew that everything had changed, that what had begun as a desperate rescue on a dusty street in Montana City had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a love strong enough to weather whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quiet of her room, Fiona stood by the window, looking out at the moon-washed landscape of Double Creek Ranch. 6 months ago, she had lost everything she held dear. Tonight, she had found a new beginning, a future filled with hope and love, with a man who had seen her value when others would have sold her to the highest bidder. "She's not for sale," Owen had said that day. And now, she never would be. She was freely giving her heart, her life, her future to the man who had recognized her worth beyond any price that could be named. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day when the aspen trees around Double Creek had turned to gold, and the air held the crisp promise of the coming winter. True to their wishes, it was a small gathering. Olivia, Charlie and the ranch hands, the pastor from Montana City and his wife, a few neighboring ranchers with whom Owen had established friendly relations over the years. The ceremony was held on the porch of the main house, which had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons under Olivia's enthusiastic direction. Fiona wore a simple dress of ivory silk, a gift from Olivia, who had ordered it from Helena, with her mother's locket around her neck, and her hair arranged in soft curls beneath a crown of autumn blossoms. Owen, standing tall and solemn in a new black suit, watched with undisguised wonder as Fiona walked toward him on Charlie's arm, the gruff foreman having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. The love shining in Owen's eyes as he took her hands in his before the pastor was all the reassurance Fiona needed that she had made the right choice. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such evident sincerity that several guests, including Olivia and, surprisingly, Charlie, dabbed at their eyes during the ceremony. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was gentle but held a promise of passion that brought a blush to Fiona's cheeks. The celebration afterward was simple, but joyous a feast prepared by Fiona with help from Olivia and the ranchers' wives. Music provided by one of the hands who played the fiddle, dancing on the packed earth of the yard as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. As twilight deepened into night and the stars began to appear overhead, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone at last. Standing on the porch, Owen's arm around Fiona's waist, they watched the last wagon disappear down the road toward town. "Happy?" Owen asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Fiona assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I can hardly believe this is real. Sometimes I fear I'll wake up and find it was all a dream, that I'm still back at my parents' homestead, alone and afraid." Owen turned her to face him, his expression serious. "This is real, Fiona. You and me, this ranch, our life together, it's all real. And I promise you'll never be alone or afraid again, not as long as I draw breath." His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, banished the last whisper of doubt from Fiona's heart. Rising on tiptoe, she kissed him, pouring all her love and trust into the gesture. Owen responded in kind, his arms tightening around her as the kiss deepened, months of restrained desire finally finding expression. When they broke apart, both breathless, Owen swept Fiona into his arms in one fluid motion, carrying her across the threshold of what was now truly their home, their sanctuary, the beginning point of all that was to come. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of what had been Owen's room and was now theirs, Fiona traced the contours of her husband's face with gentle fingers, memorizing by touch what she had admired by sight for so long. "You remember that day by the creek?" she asked softly. "When I was waiting and you came upon me unexpectedly." Owen captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'll never forget it," he replied. "You looked like something from a dream, your hair loose in the sunlight, your skirts hitched up, your feet bare in the water. I think that was the moment I knew I was falling in love with you." Fiona smiled in the darkness. "For me, it was when you defended my honor against Hargrove in the general store. The way you looked at him, like you would have moved heaven and earth to protect me, it made me realize what was in my heart." Owen gathered her closer, his warmth enveloping her like a shield against all that had once threatened her. "I would still move heaven and earth for you," he murmured against her hair. "You're my heart now, Fiona Ingram. Everything I do, everything I am, is for you." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising to Double Creek Ranch. With Fiona's careful management of the household accounts and Owen's skilled ranching, the operation prospered, allowing them to purchase additional land and expand their herds. The main house was enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a proper kitchen and dining room added, along with more bedrooms upstairs. Their first child, a son they named Joseph after the man who had helped Owen establish his ranch, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, then another son, William, and finally, when Joseph was 7, a second daughter, Margaret. Each birth was celebrated not only by the immediate family, but by the ranch hands, now increased to 5, and by Olivia, who doted on her nieces and nephews with single-minded devotion. Charlie, who had initially seemed bemused by the transformation of the bachelor rancher's home into a family dwelling, became a beloved uncle figure to the children, teaching Joseph to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk and telling all the children stories of the early days of Double Creek. Through it all, Owen and Fiona's love remained the steady foundation upon which their family and ranch were built. The passion of their early days together deepened into a bond strengthened by shared joys and sorrows, by the daily work of raising children and managing a ranch, by the knowledge that they had found in each other something rare and precious. There were challenges, of course. The winter of 1884 brought snow so deep that they lost part of the herd despite Owen and the hands working day and night to protect the cattle. A drought 3 summers later tested their resources and resolve. And there was the terrifying week when 5-year-old William wandered away from the house during a game of hide and seek, leading to a frantic search that ended only when Charlie found the boy curled up asleep in a hollow log nearly 2 miles from the ranch. But for every hardship, there were countless moments of joy and contentment: summer evenings on the porch watching the children play in the yard, winter nights by the fire, Owen reading aloud from one of their growing collection of books while Fiona mended or knitted, harvest celebrations where neighbors gathered to share food and music and stories, quiet moments stolen between husband and wife when the children were asleep, reaffirming the love that had brought them together. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, bringing changes to the territory that had been Owen and Fiona's home for over a decade. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and greater access to markets for their cattle and horses. Montana City grew from a small frontier town into a respectable community with a proper school where Elizabeth and later Margaret would develop a passion for learning that would eventually lead them to college in the East, and a hospital where Joseph would volunteer during a scarlet fever outbreak, discovering his calling as a physician. Through all these changes, Double Creek remained a haven of stability and love, not only for the Ingram family but for the hands who worked there, some staying for decades, and for Olivia, who never married but found fulfillment in her work at the telegraph office and in her role as aunt to the Ingram children. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1903, 25 years after Owen had stepped forward on a dusty street and declared, "She's not for sale," he and Fiona stood on the porch of their home, watching as their grandchildren, Joseph's twin boys, just learning to walk, played in the yard under the watchful eye of their mother. Fiona, her red gold hair now threaded with silver, but her eyes still bright with the same spirit that had captured Owen's heart all those years ago, leaned against her husband's solid strength, his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the scene before them, the expanded ranch buildings, the healthy cattle grazing on the hillsides, the evidence everywhere of a life well lived and a family well loved. Owen's arm tightened around her. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "When I was a young man, all I wanted was enough land to call my own, maybe a few good horses. I never thought I'd have all this: a family, a legacy." He turned to look at her, his expression soft with love. "You gave me that, Fiona. You gave me everything." Fiona reached up to touch his face, still handsome though now lined with the years and weathered by a lifetime spent under the Montana sky. "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. "That day in town when you said those words that changed my life, you didn't just save me from a terrible fate. You opened the door to a future I couldn't have imagined either." Owen caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that echoed their wedding night. "Best thing I ever did," he said simply, standing up and saying, "She's not for sale." "And the best thing I ever did was trusting you," Fiona replied, stretching up to kiss him as they had done countless times over the years, each kiss a renewal of the promises they had made, each one a testament to the enduring power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. As the sun began its slow descent toward the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the land that had sustained them for a quarter century, Owen and Fiona Ingram stood together, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that what they had found in each other was beyond price, a love that, having declared her not for sale, had freely given itself, creating a legacy of strength, compassion, and devotion that would endure long after they were gone.